Chinese society has changed so much, you think they need a big therapy session because, we've seen mass urbanization, we've seen, empowerment of women, we've seen many, many different changes, and people are still trying to sort of catch up. To some extent, we have a digital people with an analog government. The government has not been keeping up, and that's true in many places. But in China, the speed of change is so rapid that it's posing a lot of challenges for government. Government has to adapt to respond to these demands for better healthcare, better education, and to some extent, the internet is really the fulcrum of this. The internet is giving people, particularly with the mobile generation, power of the information in their pockets. We have almost 600 million people online. Most of them are accessing now over mobile devices. So government has to respond, or frankly, the party will lose control. When I moved to China in '94, I was perhaps an object of ridicule. People thought it was very, very weird. I was living in Hong Kong, and I moved to Beijing, and people said, well, bye-bye, we'll never see you again. And later on, I became seen as a visionary for moving there, in terms of, obviously, nobody expected how China would develop so quickly. But today, I would say, with all the pollution and so on, again, probably an object of ridicule. So, I think the role of Westerners has changed. 20 years ago, you could almost do anything. Today, the great thing about China is Chinese firms, particularly the private sector, some of these internet companies like Taobao and Tencent, are really thriving. They have Western investment, but it's Chinese management, Chinese entrepreneurs. So we don't really go there to teach, those days are over. But in certain areas, I think the West and China need to cooperate in things like the environment and now maybe regional security. China's grown so quickly, so fast that it's posing some threats to its neighbors, to the environment. And yet, China's a big part of the problems of the world, but it's also a big part of the solutions to the world's problems. So I think, engaging in China now is not if, it's how. 20 years ago, it was seen as a rather exotic place to be. I'm a Brit who grew up in New Jersey and Paris, so I found my identity in China as a sort of weird foreigner. But actually today, a foreigner showing up in China, the job opportunities for young people, and there are many young Europeans and Americans, particularly looking for work or starting businesses, they're much narrower than they were 10 years ago, because Chinese are so capable. We see hundreds of thousands of Chinese studying right now in the UK and the US, and so they come back, but they come back with fresh ideas and they have their own social networks. So I think it's very encouraging in many respects. But for Westerners today, you can't try and sell an old product in China. You have to sell the best. You have to be at the top of your game. And increasingly, you can't be a global player without winning in China. So for example, companies like Apple and Procter & Gamble or Yum Brands, if something goes wrong with their business in China, that affects them globally. So the great thing about China is it's very competitive. The tough thing about China is it's very competitive.